For more on this and other topics, David Drucker and Natalie Jennings join me now. David, as you might remember, senior correspondent at the Washington Examiner. He's also author of In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. It's a good book. And Natalie is a senior politics editor at Vox. David, let me start with you. So there's always a new poll to discuss. We have a new one today from Quinnipiac. It shows President Biden hitting a new approval low of 31%. Worse, that poll says 7 in 10 Americans surveyed don't want the president to run again. Even so, 60% also say they don't want Donald Trump on the ticket in 2024. What to make of this revulsion with the replay of the 2020 election?
Well, a couple of things, Major. I think what's important to understand here is that one of the reasons why President Biden's poll numbers are so low is because Democrats are unhappy with him. They're frustrated with him. Some of these Democrats are going to show up and vote in midterm elections. They're going to vote for Democratic candidates. But when members of your own party, when voters that tend to support your party are unhappy with leadership at the top, a lot of them can end up staying away at the polls because they're just not that inspired. And I think what it shows when you look at those numbers with Trump is that the country, broadly speaking, is hungry for fresh leadership, somebody who has not been on the scene for decades. And even though Trump is relatively new on the political scene, he's a face that Americans have known for decades. And of course, he was so in our face and continues to be in our face for the past 6 years or so that maybe it feels like he's been around almost as long as Joe Biden. And I think that both parties would do themselves a service politically if they could put forward some new faces to lead the country in 2024. It's unclear if Republicans will do that simply because Donald Trump retains so much support from the Republican base, despite having lost re-election and everything that went along with that. And look, President Biden continues to be one of the strongest Democrats on the presidential bench. He's the incumbent. He sort of has right of first refusal. And if he wasn't as old as he is, I don't think we'd be talking about the possibility of new blood at the top of the ticket the way we are. But I think it shows you that Americans are looking for something new. The question is whether they'll actually support somebody new if somebody new puts themselves forward.
Right. Seeking something new and getting something new in politics, two very different things. Natalie, as you well know, there's this sort of silver lining Democrats keep clinging to when they look at all of this bad polling data around President Biden. And that silver lining is that Democrats still run competitively and in some surveys outperform Republicans in generic polls ahead of the midterms. What do you make of that?
That's right. There's been a string of these polls in the last week or two that show on a generic ballot, what would you prefer, a Republican or a Democrat, voters giving a slight edge to Democrats. That's happening, as David was just saying, as President Biden is bottoming out, as it were. And so it's pretty unusual to see the separation, but there's a couple of factors that you could that I think explain it pretty well. One is that we're starting to see gas prices creep a little down. I know inflation is still up, but people are feeling a little relief there. There's the big abortion decision that these latest round of polls are just taking stock of people's mood about it. They know who is unaffiliated or who is affiliated with that decision and who is not. And then we're starting to see these general election races settle out, people seeing who is actually going to be their representative. And they are starting to unusually make a differentiation between Biden and those members of Congress who would represent them. So those are sorts of things that are happening right now. Whether that keeps the trend line going for the next couple of months is the next big question.
Sure. And Natalie, to your point, I'm sure the White House hopes that the president's poll numbers have, in fact, bottomed out. David, the House passed a bill yesterday that codifies same-sex as well as interracial marriage. While Republicans are, of course, understandably leaning into the economy, inflation as a midterm issue, you're a very cagey observer of Senate Republicans in that conference. What do you think Senate Republicans are going to do when this bill gets over to the Senate?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating question, Major. You know, you had 47 House Republicans jump on that bill.
What?
Mommy's on TV. You need to stay over there in the corner.
Really put some pressure on Democrats in the Senate to move the bill, and it gives some breathing room for Republicans to support the bill. So the big question is, can we get 10 Senate Republicans to put together with all 50 Democrats to break a filibuster and get this thing to Joe Biden's desk? And I think there's a real possibility this is going to happen. I think you begin with 4 yes votes right off the bat: Rob Portman, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Tom Tillis from North Carolina indicated he's ready to support it. Interestingly, the minority leader, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, is non-committal. And I think there's a possibility that he gives his blessing to this bill and supports it. I don't know that he's going to do that. His office is playing very coy. McConnell is playing very coy. And lots of Republicans are sort of throwing the ball up in the air here and trying to figure out where it's going to land and how they want to catch it. I think the only way we're going to know what happens is if Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer puts this thing on the floor. And I think that if you care about passage of this bill politically, the best thing for it is for it to be put on the floor before the August recess. Members are going to go home for a month, 5 weeks or so, talk to a lot of voters. And I think that the more Republicans think about this, the more feedback they get from the Republican base. It's unclear if these 10 Senate votes from the Republican side materialize. But I think the fact that this could actually get across the finish line and render the Obergefell decision from 2015 that legalized same-sex marriage nationally not, the linchpin in marriage rights for same-sex couples is a very big deal. And whereas 10 to 20 years ago, you'd say this was a tougher vote for Democrats, this is now a much tougher vote for Republicans. And the best thing they could do politically would be to support this and get it off the table. The question is, will they?
David, your experience and mine is when the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is non-committal, he's usually looking for a way to get to yes. Natalie, I want to talk to you about something that happened near the end of President Trump's term. There were court challenges about adding a census question on citizenship to the census, and the president at his time and the administration said they were not really working on that. There were no implications politically for Republicans, but a new congressional report has come out. What did it say?
It looked at communication that happened way back at the beginning of the Trump administration when they were trying to, at the Commerce Department, figure out a way to rationalize putting this question of whether citizenship status should be on the census, onto the census. We got a look in a report that came out today from the House Government and Oversight Committee about what they found when the Biden administration finally turned over communication from the Commerce Department about this. And we saw a series of kind of communications that were done carefully that did show that they were aware that there was precedent against putting this question on the ballot, that it was unlikely to withstand a legal challenge, and that they knew that they were doing something that would kind of mask the rationale that was really the rationale why they wanted to do this, which was to maybe keep numbers low of undocumented immigrants. And now we see that in these messages that were released this week.
Very good. David, last night, Dan Cox, a candidate endorsed by former President Trump, won the Republican primary for Maryland governor, beating out Kelly Schulz, who was endorsed by outgoing and very popular Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan. So, proxy battle is a phrase we use commonly. How much was this a referendum on the former president in Maryland?
Well, I think it shows you where the Republican base is in Maryland, and that's not surprising. And look, Larry Hogan isn't the first Republican to have trouble transferring his popularity to an endorsed candidate. Donald Trump's had some of those issues in Georgia, Idaho, Nebraska, and in some key congressional races. I think the bigger issue here, Major, is that this was yet another Republican primary where Democrats and Democratic groups poured a lot of money into a Republican primary to elevate the so-called unelectable candidate. Now, Dan Cox probably can't win in deep blue Maryland, but I think this is important because Democrats, and this is a key part of their 2022 messaging, and it'll be a key part of their 2024 messaging, is that Republicans, particularly Trump-aligned Republicans, are a threat to American democracy. And coming out of what happened on January 6th, 2021, and the 2020 election, there's a case that Democrats can make to independent and swing voters that Republicans are problematic on this issue. But when you're spending lots of money to nominate these same kinds of Republicans, it really undermines your message. And the message it could send to swing voters and to others, is that you really don't believe Republicans are a threat to democracy because you're treating all of these Republicans the same way you've always treated them. Politically, it makes a lot of sense. You try and get the other candidate that's not electable across the finish line. It's an easier general election out. But in a forming Republican wave where anything might be possible, Democrats, as I've talked to Trump critics, they say Democrats are playing with fire on this, and they very well could be.
Natalie, the Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly said just last week he fielded a request from former President Trump to decertify the 2020 election results. After the conversation, Mr. Trump criticized Speaker Robin Vos about ballot drop boxes in that state. Is there an overlap or any overlap on this issue potentially for Republicans, or is it in any way problematic going forward?
It's problematic in that this is not proving to be a very winning issue for Trump. It's reminding a lot of Republicans what they didn't like about the Trump era. We're seeing his support erode among them already. And we're not seeing a lot of, messaging from Trump on issues that a lot of the Republican base cares about right now and a lot of the general public. And so that's not doing anyone any favors. This is something in a very important swing state that a lot of Republicans who want to win there in Wisconsin would rather not be talking about. And that's grabbing a lot of attention once again this week because of Trump's actions 18 months after he was, after January 6th happened.
18 months indeed. Natalie Jennings, David Drucker, thanks so much for your time.